Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk to you guys about sensory overload. I know this can be a touchy subject, especially after a brain injury, and something I struggled with a lot. My injury was so severe I was not allowed to have more than 15 minutes of stimulation a day. And as most of you know, that's talking, cameras, TVs, phones, lights, you name it, anything that stimulates our brain. So let's get right to it. Let's get to the way that you can actually help deal with your overload when it comes to your senses. Let's talk about your first coping mechanism. And the first thing I would suggest is to rest before you head out. Resting before you can head out sounds very simple, and probably you're like, okay, what is that going to really do? But it really makes a huge difference. It's something I fought early on in my injury just because I'm not a napper per se. But once I decided to see if that would really help, it did. And so it became an essential part of my everyday routine is to find that quiet time and just go and be. Didn't have to necessarily be a nap, but any quiet space that I could just sit and let my brain rest for a little while was well worth it. Coping mechanism number 2 would be to plan and prepare ahead. What do I mean by this? Say you're going to go to the grocery store, maybe deciding to go at a time where you know it's not as crowded as or busy would be more beneficial for you. This was something I really had to put into place depending where I was going and when I was traveling, and I would take into consideration how was the traffic at that time, what were the type of crowds in that area, etc., etc. If I felt that my brain could not handle that stimulation, I simply just didn't go at those times, and I changed my routine accordingly. Coping mechanism number 3 is know your limits. This was something I really struggled with and had to rely on those around me, my friends, or whoever I was going out with, to kind of gauge to see what was my limit. And that was where I implemented the chip system, where instead of having to explain all the time that my head hurts or I'm overtired when I was out, the chip system was something simple I could implement, and it goes like this. When you wake up in the morning, you have 3 chips, which for you is a full battery, so to speak. So what you do is tell your friends and family to check in on where your chips are at throughout the day. That way you're not always having to explain yourself as to what's going on, and they're not always trying to understand. It's pretty simple, and it worked really well for me. So when I would go out with my friends, they would come up to me and say, where are your chips at? If my chips were at like a 1, they knew it was time for me to go home. That meant that my battery was draining and it was just too much for me at that moment. So that might be something that would help you, but know your limits and know what you can do and what you can't do. As we know, if you don't honor your limits, we pay for it later, and it can be detrimental for us, especially after our injuries. Coping method number 4, gradually increase your exposure. This was something I just naturally had to do, and honestly at the time didn't really give it much thought. Right after my injury, if I was to go out and talk to people or meet people, even if it was for 30 minutes, I was in bed for 4 or 5 days after. And that continued on like that. So what I would do is gradually expose myself longer and longer to the stimulations until my brain could adjust. But it still took a long time. I eventually went down from 5 days in bed to 4 days in bed to 3 days in bed to 2 days in bed. I would know that even though this, however long this stimulation I would be out and about, I would probably be in bed for a good 3 to 4 days. I knew that, but I knew there was no other way to really start to prepare my brain for the kind of exposure and work it out. I mean, it's kind of like exercise except for the brain. You just have to know your give and takes, and again, your limits, and know what you can handle at the time and what you can't. And lastly, I would say this. Always, always honor your needs. No matter what you need, it's important to voice that and have grace with yourself. This is not going to be a quick fix, and this is going to be a long haul journey. So it's going to take time. These methods I had to practice for months. And it took me a very long time to get back to where I am today. So don't beat yourself up and don't think there's something extra wrong with you. Just understand this is part of the journey and take it with ease. Give yourself a lot of self-care and grace and know that you'll eventually get there. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you're looking for some tools and techniques to help you with your sensory issues, I've done videos on mindfulness and meditation that you will find in the playlist down below that I encourage you to check out. They will help you also to deal with your sensory issues and to really move forward. Thank you guys for being here, and I'll see you on the next one. I'm sending you tons of hugs and healing.